We back. And only one day late.
I'm always just sitting here waiting to see who will say something first.
It's like a verbal chicken.
Since we don't have a
Like
specific
an intro.
Yeah.
I sometimes I think about that because like I know that like people find us on YouTube and we're just literally two randos. Like they probably don't know our names, like any context for us. We should probably have an intro. Like
Nah.
greetings, I'm Zoe Rome. Professional ultra running coach, elite trail runner for Team Rabbit. I have certifications in strength training, ultra running coaching, and women's specific training.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
We're doing it.
Great byline.
Great byline.
What are we getting into today?
Voted most likely to win the Hunger Games by my high school in 2012.
I could see that.
Yeah.
You're ruthless. You're a ruthless coach.
Wow.
And women's certified
nice
coach.
I hold my people to account. So that way they know that when I'm nice, I mean it and they earned it. Because I'm a good coach.
You have to earn my love and respect.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it works.
Well, hopefully we can find some balance on this one today. I'm already nervous. What are we getting into?
We're gonna do some hot or nots. Thank you guys for sending in your hot or nots. Just encourage you folks, comment on our YouTube, comment on the podcast if you have things that you want us to chat about. We're going to do 3 hot or nots, 2 listener questions. We're going to talk about my recent experience doing VO2 max and lactate threshold testing and offer some guidance on how other people can calibrate their zones if they don't have access to an Olympic grade laboratory.
Oh, awesome. I'm excited. Yeah. And again, we have a lot going on in our community Slack channel. That's where we poached these hot or not questions. So this is stuff that's going on in the community that people are talking about. Big ups to those guys. You also can get involved with this microcosm Slack channel. It's called Foothills, and we'd love to hear from you, talk to you there, get involved with our community roundtables and all of that.
I would say it has all the vibrancy of the running and ultra running subreddits with none of the idiocy.
I like that.
It's a safe space for people to have good ideas and share killer dog pics.
No coaching nightmares.
No coaching nightmares.
All right, let's get into this because we got a lot to cover today. Okay, hot or not, walking backwards on the treadmill.
So, sort of doing a preliminary dive into this, there was like one study that seems to be pretty well reputed and widely cited. I think it's worth noting that it was on untrained individuals, and the populations we work with are not untrained, they are quite trained. And so a lot of the benefits were like, let's compare walking on a treadmill versus like no activity.
Right.
So walking backwards on a treadmill is better than no activity, we can safely say. There are indications that, again, in untrained populations, it can improve signs of cardiovascular fitness, pulmonary fitness, and it showed a lot of help, like helping people improve their balance.
Yeah.
But there was no research showing that it's like meaningfully helpful for like improving running specific metrics.
Yeah, I think in a running context, this gets a not hot for me.
Yeah, I'm not going to be wasting my time walking backwards on the treadmill.
But
there could be some like PT applications for this in terms of helping better engage the quadriceps, doing some glute activation. I do think there are specific applications for this, but when we're doing hot or nots, we're less like, let's examine every single test case, and it's more like, let's vibe out and look at, is this something that I recommend at large? And no.
I've never once prescribed this to an athlete.
Yeah. So that's a not hot from both of us.
All right. Okay, good start. Getting by on baby wipe sponge baths after a long trail run when you have to immediately go somewhere where you're going to be around a lot of people, hot or not?
Hot. Love this.
This
Love
is your
energy.
life. This is your life.
So me. This is extremely Zoe coded. I literally can't believe this isn't a fake question that I made up. So shout out to whoever submitted this. We're soul sisters. I'm gross. Did you shower after your run today?
Absolutely.
I have not yet showered today.
100%. I'm
going to do a double.
There's not a chance that I can go into work without having showered.
We work from home.
I get sticky. I need that separation between my training life and my working and coaching life.
Yeah.
They're two different. I'm trying to continually reinforce to myself that they are two different things, even though it feels like one long continuous workday sometimes. But the shower helps me, and I sweat a lot.
Yeah.
I was doing threshold intervals uphill today, and I was soaked like
Yeah.
through by the second 8-minute interval. There's no way I could even be in an office with myself after that. It'd be way too stinky, way too sticky.
I'm a dusty little swamp creature who uses her time efficiently, so I'm still gonna say hot. I love this. I love this energy. If I'm meeting you at a brewery, there's a 90% chance I haven't showered.
Oh my God. What have I gotten myself into?
Ah.
Okay, so I'm not hot on that one.
Yeah, I'm hot. So,
Very
you know, live and let live.
Okay, training to let off steam and de-stress. Hot or not?
Not hot, because that's not how anything works. I know that it like can emotionally feel like, yes, like, physical exercise does have mental health benefits, can mentally give you the feeling of relieving stress, and that can be positive, but you have to take that into the context. And I would encourage folks to go back and listen to our episode from a couple weeks ago about stress is stress, because there's oxidative stress involved with training and exercise. You are literally creating like small, tiny little like micro fissures in your bones and in your muscles that need to be repaired. Like, it might mentally feel like you're relieving stress, but you are producing physical stress, you're producing hormonal stress, you're releasing cortisol. It is stress. And so I would really encourage athletes to have a robust tool set for navigating stress. Running and activity can be a tool that we reach for, but it can't be a crutch that we continually reach for. And we always want to be sure that when we're reaching for it, we're not doing it to the detriment of the productivity of the training or to the detriment of our mental health, right? Like, if I have an athlete who feels like the only way that they can manage their emotions and that they can mitigate stress is through physical activity, that's a problem. And that's a problem called exercise dependency. And that is serious. So, not hot.
I'm gonna play the devil's advocate here. I'm gonna say that running, this is with a huge caveat. If you are mindfully using this as a tool to de-stress, it can be hot to have that space. Yeah, I've been navigating a lot of family-related health stress issues, and it's weighed.
That's why we're recording a day late. Thanks
Right.
for everyone for bearing with us and being
Gosh,
patient.
they just couldn't wait 24 hours for this podcast to come out for me to talk about stress. I think that, stress is stress. And if running is your only tool or outlet for dealing with it, that's a huge problem. It's very much not hot. But I know for myself, like, it's been helpful to have running and to try to do my training to the best of my ability while I navigate a lot of emotional stress, because it gives me it's giving me a little more space to process what's going on.
Yeah.
But
it can be a method of self-care and taking time for yourself.
Yeah.
But again, there is a physical reality associated with it.
And I
But
think that's really true. Like today, I was thinking about
stress
that.
isn't like a get out of jail free card for athletes, right? I think sometimes they're like, oh, like, I'll give them, it's a rest day, but they're like, I was stressed, so I had to do a run. No, like, you missed a rest day. You just missed a day of training by training.
Right. No, I mean, and I think that's the key, right? Like, are we training mindlessly or are we training mindfully? And your training can work under a variety of different life circumstances if you're doing it mindfully. Mm-hmm. But if you're involved in a mindless process of training and basing everything on a feeling and on a whim and on an emotion, then I think you're probably setting yourself up to get the probably the not so good end of this, which is that running is stress and it's going to cause you more stress.
Yeah. And again, if you don't have other tools and exercise is the only way for you to manage or numb emotions, that's a real problem that you should consult a mental health professional about.
Hats off to our therapists out there.
We love therapists. Shout out, we both have therapists. If you can't tell from everything you just heard, shout out to the mental health professionals keeping Team Microcosm on the straight and narrow.
God bless them.
God bless him.
All right, let's get into our listener questions. These are some easy hot or nots this week. I love a good
that.
easy
Yeah.
warm up.
Hit us up with more. Get in those comments, guys.
Here's another listener question that is also not going to necessitate too deep of a dive, which I also really appreciate. So here we go. I will be running the Snowmass Ragnar Relay this summer as an ultra team event. The way we're formatted, each person will be running 3 half marathon legs, each in a relay style. The relay format means each person gets a 6 to 7 hour break between each leg. Talking to my teammates recently, they expressed that their fitness is not where they wanted it to be, but that they, and I quote, will get fitter as the race goes on.
Oh boy.
I think the implication is that there will be an accumulation of fitness since there is a recovery period between each leg of the race. Okay.
Wow. I love the shade that the question is throwing at this person.
Yes.
Love that. Love that pettiness. Love that. Love that passive aggression. We are so vibing.
Oh, the implication.
I love that everyone else on this team is like an unshowered, petty asshole. You guys are my people.
You fit right in there, Zoe.
Right in, just right at home. No, you're not an asshole. You're amazing because obviously this is nonsensical. That's not how anything works. Adaptations take like weeks, like minimum, like 14 days
14
minimum.
days.
So no, you won't be getting fitter as the race goes on. You are accumulating stress and not adapting to it. And that's what's happening. So that's tough. And, this person might want to check themselves.
I feel for the team here that's going into this 3 half marathon leg relay style event up at Snowmass. Gosh, I hope you guys can connect and set some really realistic goals and expectations for the weekend, because nobody's accumulating any fitness between those legs, unfortunately.
Also, in a 6 to 7 hour break, that's like not really enough time. Like, even if it were theoretically possible to build adaptations instantaneously, 6 to 7 hours ain't it either. This is just impossible on every single level, respectfully.
Yes, and you could refer them to our podcast on the timeline for adaptations, which we did a few months ago.
Can you imagine if your teammate submitted a question about you to a podcast and then sent you that podcast?
I like that for this listener.
That. Yeah, same.
I do. I think that could be really
it's an
great.
Incredible energy.
They could probably learn a lot from our podcast.
Yeah, love that.
Okay. Another question here from a listener. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Appropriate shoes can be confusing, especially when the price tags start to add up. Since trail racing is a different sport, it's also confusing about what shoes are appropriate for flat-footed folks like me, or maybe even for people with high arches. When and where is the terrain important enough to equip yourself with appropriate shoes, like different trail types, high roads versus technical scrambles and scree? Does foot arch matter? Do people actually need to correct anything? What are some tips for form, gait, foot strike, and strengthening the little things adjacent to problems like these? What do we do? What do we actually know? And what does science say about this generally?
Wow. Okay. Love this. So first things first, I'm just going to address like the terrain appropriateness. I think that buying shoes specifically for fire roads is stupid. Don't do that. Like, I think the gravel shoe trend, they're not good. They're just kind of like bad trail shoes and or uncomfortable road shoes. I think that the real thing you want to look for on trail shoes is like a super shoe versus or like a higher cushion shoe or a long distance shoe versus like a technical shoe. I think, running in carbon and or like plated shoes in really technical terrain is definitely not for everybody. And so that would definitely be something I would look for if you're running in more technical terrain, getting like maybe a lower profile shoe that doesn't have like a huge rocker, a ton of stuff going on.
Or a big stack height.
For speed, I'm a huge fan of plated carbon plated trail shoes. I mean, they're like proven to be performance enhancing. However, you're going to see diminishing returns if you're running slower than like a 9-minute mile. So mileage may vary literally on that. So I would say like definitely get trail shoes if you're running on trails. If I was running a lot of like fire roads or gravel roads, I'm probably just going to wear like a normal road shoe, honestly.
Yeah. Or I think a lighter carbon plated, trail
trail
shoe,
shoe,
like
like a
the
speedy trail shoe.
yeah, like the Adidas Aggravate Speed or Trail
Yeah.
Speed, whatever that one's
But
called with the long name.
to speak to the arch support of it all, so there's no shoe like that exists that has arch support in it. Asics actually tried to make one several, like 10 years, 15 years ago at this point. But the human foot, like arch location and height is extremely variable person to person.
So individual.
So there's really no way to truly incorporate an arch support into a specific shoe, which is why you see arch supports sold differently. I think those can be a really great tool, particularly for athletes who struggle with foot pain, Achilles tendonitis, and plantar fasciitis. But what we do really want folks to avoid, and like it, so sometimes flat-footed people will be totally fine not having a direct arch support, like an insole. A lot of times, like if you have a higher arch, you might have even more benefit with a direct arch support, or you can have indirect arch support vis-a-vis stack height. So when we think about, or a heel, offset. So
Yeah,
when
stack
we
height.
think about stack height is how much foam there is underfoot,
Right, but you're
not the offset.
yeah,
We got
the heel
offset.
to toe.
Heel toe offset. So most trail shoes, we're seeing a lot of like lower heel toe offsets. So something like 4 millimeters up to like, I think the Brooks Cascadia, it
12
was 12. So if you have like a higher heel toe differential, that provides a little bit of indirect support that's slightly different than a direct arch support, like an insert, that can help. With those higher offsets, you do sort of get diminished trail feel because there's like more shoe underfoot.
Yeah.
But I'm also really not a fan of these zero stack height shoes, like the Ultras and the Topos, because like they are just like Achilles slayers. They work for some people, and I'm happy for you. And please don't get in the comments or like DM me about this, because people who love 0 millimeter shoes like you can pry them from their Achilles called dead hands.
Well, we have seen a lot of athletes throughout the
it's in the
years
reach,
lower
like,
leg injuries
yes.
as a result of wearing those shoes.
Yeah, I am not a fan of the flat shoe, regardless of, again, some people's specific physiology, it's totally fine for. I'm happy for you. You do you. Keep rocking out. But I think that it's not what I would recommend people gravitate towards immediately. So if you're struggling with foot pain, like I don't think that if you like, there's no shape of foot that should make you buy a certain shoe. I think it's like how your foot is feeling and interacting with the training. So if you are having foot pain, that's when I would maybe look for more indirect support and a higher heel toe differential, or potentially that insert. Like if you are really loving like a Hoka, which has like a 4 or 5 millimeter heel toe offset, and you're like, well, I don't really want to do the Brooks Cascadia sort of thing, then you can put an insert in there, bada bing, bada boom, more arch support. But no shoes offer arch support. And also trail shoe, like there's a lot of debate now, because back in the day, there used to be a lot of conversation at like, specialty running stores about stability shoes, where you would have medial posting that prevented overpronation. The research is sort of showing that that's maybe not as necessary as was previously thought. If you are having like persistent injuries, yeah, there can be a benefit to getting shoes that have medial posting or offer some stability. Thinking like the Brooks Ravenna, the Adrenaline is like was the most popular shoe when I was working in retail. Hoka's, just because of the stack height and the width of their shoe, also sort of have some indirect like stability built in. But also the research is sort of more indicating if you're running injury free, like you really probably don't need to worry about this. And I would say on trails, there was like one brand that ever made stability trail shoes. Pearl Izumi, which no longer makes trail shoes, used to make a stabilizing trail shoe. The thinking there being like, well, your footstep is going to be so varied anyway that you're not really taking advantage of that stability, so it's really just weighing you down. So we don't want to overthink our biomechanics on trail in that regard, because it is already so varied.
I think also it's important to recognize like, what are the other causes of injury? Are you ramping up your training a little bit too fast? Are you doing too much intensity? Are you not doing enough intervals uphill to limit impact forces on the body? How quickly are you doing a lot of running in very steep terrain? There's a lot of things that kind of like compound, and sometimes it's hard to find the exact signal in the noise. The shoe choice may not be like the main factor here. I think also
A lot of research indicates that shoes are not a big factor in injury. Like there have been recent studies looking at if higher cushion shoes can like have any impact on injury. And
They've
like
looked at
no,
this with
they're not.
carbon
They're like
too.
not. Yeah, and carbon. There's just like not a strong correlation there. So it's extreme. Which means like it's very individual, right? Like that study doesn't mean like no one will ever get injured from running in an appropriate shoe. That could still happen, but at the population level, we just don't have any signal in the noise right now.
I think it's also important for athletes to think a little bit too about like common form, gait, posture, foot strike tips that can also help to alleviate some of these things. One of the big things that I think about is foot strike. The more midfoot your strike is, the more it's about underneath your body, the more evenly it loads your posterior chain. So turning on both the hamstrings and the glutes equally, it's kind of important. Especially getting that glute to activate. If you're consistently overstriding, that can cause some stress.
So again, if you are getting persistently injured, maybe, but the research doesn't indicate that people should just automatically gait retrain or try to change their natural running form, particularly on trail.
Yes, for sure. But there are universal things in biomechanics of running that athletes should be thinking about. Like one of those things is about where that foot strike is. Another one of those things is your posture and making sure that your like neck, your back, and your glutes are in good alignment, not hinging at the waist. Like some of these things are actually kind of hard. Yeah. And you need to film yourself. You know, you could film yourself running to see where you're at with it. We have a great article on our blog about posture that could be good to look at.
We put out an episode a few weeks ago called How to Fix Your Running Form. So check that out.
We did do that. So check those resources out. I think that'll provide some information. But yeah, Zoe, you're right. Like one of the big takeaways from all of this is like, don't necessarily go and try to change your gait. That can sometimes cause injuries.
Yeah, it's extremely variable. The research is not like extremely clear in any direction necessarily, but yeah, you don't need to buy arch support footwear for trail. So yeah.
All right, shall we get into how to set our zones?
Yeah.
How are your zones set?
So I recently actually went to Colorado Springs to go to the CTS lab to do a lactate threshold and VO2 max test.
And did you throw up?
I did not throw up, thankfully. I actually really liked it. So,
why?
Well, it's always really cool to work in person with your coach and just actually get to like get down and dirty with some data, right? Like I know that you and I always have a skeptical posture towards some amount of data, right? Like a lot of times, particularly newer athletes get like over obsessed with data that doesn't meaningfully help their training. And it's sort of just like emotional support data, you know?
Yeah.
Like TrainingPeaks gives you a lot of numbers that you like genuinely don't need. Like, yeah. It's just not useful. But like, obviously the more data that like your watch gives you or that your app gives you, it's kind of a marketing ploy more than it is like a usable feature. So like honestly, like sort of my assumption going in when I was offered to do this lactate threshold testing and VO2 max testing to establish where my lactate threshold is, where my aerobic threshold is, and where my VO2 max and maximal oxygen usage are, I was a little like, I'm not really expecting to get much out of this, but it'll be cool to do.
Right.
And I walked away like with a really different opinion. Honestly, I was like, this is amazing. And I would recommend like way more athletes do this if they can, because it sort of helps you cut through a lot of bullshit training. Like so much of the data we're looking at, and the reason we always want to contextualize it and never get obsessed with it is because it's proxies.
Yeah.
Like it's not like, unless we are literally testing the lactate levels in your blood, it's like an informed guess when we do like a field test or when we try to calibrate the zones, like we'll talk about later. But I think people get really obsessed about data that is standing on sort of shaky ground. And I think that doing this test in the lab also made me realize like how extremely wrong like the heart rate zones that both Strava and TrainingPeaks gave me were off by like a laughable amount, like an unusable amount.
Good thing you don't train by heart rate.
Correct. Yeah. I do use a heart rate monitor, but I don't ever look at my heart rate. So
So one would wonder.
you know, but that way, like it goes into my TrainingPeaks and we can track trends over time, but I'm never looking at it in the moment or even like afterwards, really. So how the test works is that you do like a warm up and then you get on the treadmill and you're hooked up to a metabolic cart so they can tell how much carbohydrate you're using, how much fat you're using at different intensities. And to do the lactate threshold test, basically I ran easy for a little bit and then every 3.5 minutes, my amazing lab tech Renee increased my speed a little bit and then would take blood from my finger to see how much lactate was in my blood at different intensities. And we kept going and going until there was sort of like a hockey stick, like boom, like no longer clearing lactate from my bloodstream.
You must have been going pretty fast at that point.
Actually, the thing that was cool about this is I hadn't done like a threshold field test like I do with my athletes. My coach had sort of looked at years and years of my data and workout data and had guessed my lactate threshold, and he was off by only 1 second, which is
wow,
pretty cool.
That's pretty amazing.
Shout out Cliff.
Nice
You're a
work.
wizard.
Wow, that's impressive.
So that was cool. And basically, like, you find the point where you're no longer able to shuttle lactate from your bloodstream. So that was pretty reassuring to know that, like, again, like the way that my coach had helped me calibrate my zones, like we were more or less on. However, all of my heart rate zones were totally off.
Right.
Like none of them were accurate or usable. So we got to recalibrate all of those because your heart is being continuously monitored. So after I did the lactate threshold test, I rested for 10 minutes, hydrated, and then did a VO2 max test, which for basically 7 minutes, they started me like right around my lactate threshold a little slower, and then instead of increasing the speed, they just increased the vert. Also, what's really cool is they literally had like 2 people spotting me in case I went flying off the treadmill.
Yeah, because people do that.
Yes, yeah. Like you'll see some labs literally have like athletes in a harness, so you don't just get like thrown against the wall because you're going all out.
Yeah, when I did, I've done a couple tests when I was in college as part of an exercise science program, and it was I had the puke bucket out for my test. It really took me to the limits.
I went to the limit, but I wasn't like, I didn't have to hold it for like 5 minutes. So that was cool. And I actually really did enjoy it. I mean, the mask that you have to wear, I mean, I'm not saying I want to train with it, but I actually didn't think it was that bad.
I hated it.
I thought it was easier than I thought it was going to be. Wow. Honestly. So, you know, I sort of went in with the intent of like, you know, this data could be cool, but like, you know, I'm an elite athlete, but I'm not like the best trail runner in the world. So like, do I actually need this data? And I walked away feeling like, wow, this was a very good use of my time and energy. So
I'm curious for you, before we get into, you know, how athletes can set their zones. I'm just really curious if this helped you recalibrate the effort you're going to be looking at holding on your workouts, if this changed your perception of that at all, or if those perceptions were already really dialed in to begin with.
What I think another takeaway, so again, like having my another part of the test is that my coach was standing by the treadmill holding a chart with RPE, and every time I was getting my blood drawn, I had to point to what RPE I thought I was at, which is also felt a little bit like a test. Like when it's your like actual coach being like, how hard are you going really? And he can see your heart rate and can see how much lactate's accumulating in your bloodstream. That's kind of a perfectionist's nightmare, but we moved through it, which actually it was cool because I noticed.
Were you downplaying how hard you were going?
No, what I noticed though, psychologically, there was a point where he was asking me to identify my RPE, and I was like, oh, I'm running 840 pace. That's easy. Rather than like, I'm running easy. That's a 5 or a 4.
Right.
I was like, oh shit. Like I'm actually like, my brain still wants to go to like, this pace should be easy. Therefore it is easy, rather than like, is this easy? And what is the pace?
I think that's a huge insight for you.
I think so too.
You need to get those numbers off the watch face.
Correct. Yeah. I don't train by pace.
Right.
Usually. Like,
Sure.
I mean, when I'm on a treadmill, the number is there, you know?
I covered it all up.
So I just thought that was like, I noticed that in like my psychology. I was like, I had to be really intentional to not be like, it should be this.
Yeah.
To rate how I actually felt, which like, again, they were monitoring my lactate and my heart rate. So they like, no, you know?
Right.
So that was helpful and like honest and helped me stay honest. It was also to me extremely frightening how close my threshold is to my VO2 max, which is like a very classic ultra runner physiology.
Right. But that also means like you're actually going to end up being really limited to how much you can grow your aerobic system until you work on those building more space. So it gives you a target for your training.
But also, yes, but right now in my training, because I'm training for specific races, I'm not as concerned with developing VO2 max. So that's sort of more like in the long arc of my training, and I'm not like that stressed about it. I'm like, awesome, can't wait till, you know, my speed season next year. But like, I mean, but also it's good news because I have a very strong, like I was very good at shuttling lactate. I'm extremely efficient at that. I have an extremely efficient metabolism, which was encouraging to know.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, that was a really cool component of it too. But I think that it really helped me put all of these pieces together that I've been working with as a coach and an athlete for so long, of like RPE, of heart rate, of fat utilization, of carbohydrate utilization, oxygen uptake, lactate shuttling, and sort of like you feel very viscerally how all of that is working. And I thought that was very cool.
Is there any kind of way to use that test to take a look into like how efficient your running stride is, or what your
so they can look at your running economy. It was actually one thing that was fascinating is at one point for 3.5 minutes they had me run at like 8:34 pace, and my like efficiency tanked at specifically that pace.
Really?
Very, like the lab tech was like, that's not that uncommon. Like if there might just be a certain pace that like, if you don't train at it very often, like if you're usually training slower or faster than it, which like I do, like 8:34 is sort of like not like, I don't spend a lot of time there. Which my body was sort of like kind of treated it funky, and you could tell in the data.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah. And another thing that was cool is there were sort of like the lactate shuttling wasn't as gradual as I had anticipated. And when we talk about the zones that we'll talk about here in just a second, you could actually sort of see there were sort of like jumps in how much lactate was accumulating that almost perfectly coincided with where those zones would hypothetically be.
Yeah.
Which was really cool.
That's fun. That's awesome.
So I really enjoyed it. Again, like it's like a $300 test for most folks. And I know that that's a considered purchase, and you do have to like have connection with a lab and a reputable lab tech. Like this is not something that like any fucking like strength coach or Pilates instructor can do. Like you do need like a master's degree minimum to do this.
Absolutely.
So I feel extremely privileged to have gotten to do this, particularly with my coach. And I'm just, so I had a really great time, and I feel like it really shifted my mindset and understanding about a lot of things, which is like what I'm always looking for as a coach, is like, how do I update my understanding? How do I update my practice and experience as an athlete too?
All right. So let's talk about those running zones that you're referring to on your test. Let's get into how to set those things. Let's talk about the 5-zone model a little bit. All right. So what even are running zones?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to define running zones. It's definitely something that gets thrown about pretty casually in coaching parlance and on the internet. But here are some of the most common ways to think about running zones. So pace, which would be based on speed, minutes per mile. This can work well on flat road or treadmill, but it's really not useful when you take into account vert, terrain, and heat. So really any environmental condition.
We also have heart rate, which tracks your beats per minute, lags behind effort, and is easily influenced by a myriad of like external factors: sleep, caffeine, heat, hydration are a couple of them. We also have power, which is measured in watts. This is not really great for runners.
Yeah, because we haven't yet invented a device that can accurately measure it. There's some like labs that can sort of have mechanisms for this, but we don't yet have a great solution for a running power meter that exists outside of a laboratory setting.
And then we do have RPE, or rate of perceived exertion, which we've talked a little bit about already on other podcast episodes. This is what we primarily use with the athletes we coach, and it's a scale from 1 to 10 that captures how hard something feels in real time. And I think, what was really cool hearing about from your test, Zoe, was that like you actually had already a very dialed in perception of your RPE zones.
Yeah.
And so like your training was actually, you were doing quite fine with your training before the test.
Yeah.
But the test was valuable,
Yes.
but you don't need to do that test to train really effectively.
Yeah, that's true. So let's talk a little bit about the traditional 5-zone heart rate model. So a lot of devices use this 5-zone model, and what this typically looks like is zone 1, which is usually somewhere between 50 to 60% of max heart rate, which is very easy. So that's used for recovery and warm-ups. Then we get to zone 2, which is like the famous like fat burning endurance zone, which helps build aerobic endurance. And this is somewhere around 60 to 70% of max heart rate.
Zone 3 is your tempo zone, or moderate. I like to think about it as moderate, steady state, 70 to 80% of max HR. Not very hard, but also not easy. It's like a focused effort.
Yeah, and I think that this is where, like, again, beginner athletes tend to hang out in zone 3 a little much, the gray zone. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, because zone 3 is where you're going to spend like the least amount of time for most athletes.
It's not usually very valuable. We've talked a little bit about some research also in past episodes that talk about that. Zone 4, 80 to 90% of max HR. This is our threshold work, 1 hour effort, feeling workouts, teaches your body to buffer and clear lactate more efficiently. And then we also have our zone 5, or 90 to 100% of max HR, which is where we're going to get our VO2 max training, short, very intense efforts.
Yeah, so I did want to talk a little bit about the limitations of heart rate training and why heart rate based training in the zone 5 model has limited, like, again, I don't tell athletes to like throw their heart rate straps into the ocean, but we do have to understand the limitations so that we can use it correctly. So I'm not saying don't use it correctly. So it can be useful, but it's not perfect. And I often find that athletes are over reliant on it because it seems very sciencey, right? Like, you're measuring your heart. How could your heart be wrong? But there are common issues with it. For instance, lag time. Your heart rate takes time to catch up with your effort, especially on hills, intervals, or any sort of effort like a fartlek.
Environmental effects, heat, humidity, dehydration, stress, caffeine can all inflate heart rate. Also, being fatigued can lower heart rate more than expected, sometimes a sign of being under recovered, which can then push athletes to overtrain to get their heart rate where they think it should be. And devices are glitchy. Like, not all wrist-based HR monitors are that good.
Some of them don't work on melanated skin at all, which, what?
Yeah. I have multiple chest strap HRs that just don't work really at all. So I don't know. For me, honestly, like, I use the one on my wrist. I felt
use
like
the Koros armband, and I'm actually a big fan of it.
I've heard that's a good one. Like, I actually feel like my Garmin wrist is more accurate than either of my Wahoo or Suunto chest straps, which consistently just stop working, just stop being connected.
Yeah.
Such a pain in the ass. Like, I just do the one on the wrist, gets close enough, and like barely even ever look at it anyways, because RPE.
Yeah. So I think there's some, like, let's talk about some of the most common mistakes that we see athletes make when it comes to doing heart rate based 5-zone model training. And number 1 is treating heart rate zones like they're gospel. They aren't exact. They're a guide. Totally. Another one is running too hard on easy days, because zone 3 feels good, but it isn't helping build your aerobic base, and it's also not pushing your lactate threshold or VO2 max.
Right. So it's just like training in this gray zone too often, that middle ground between easy and hard, where we're really limiting recovery and we're also limiting performance gains.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of like outdated max heart rate formulas that feel like you always see on like the walls of like, like the fucking Planet Fitness.
Yeah.
Where it's like, your heart rate zones are 220 minus your age. Oh, what? No. That's not how anything works.
I love it. My max HR is like 199.
No. Bottom line, heart rate is a tool, not a rule. You can let it inform you. I always cue my athletes to use it like training wheels or bumpers in bowling. You can use it to cross-reference with how your body feels, but the best heart rate monitor is always going to be the one between your ears.
So why your watch, Strava, or TrainingPeaks zones might be wrong. I think it's super important to be real about this, because most devices, they calculate your zones using basic algorithms based on your age, recent workouts, estimated VO2 max, And while that might work as a starting point, it's often way off for runners, especially trail runners, because of that variation in terrain. And then also aging athletes or anyone who, just like isn't consistently training.
Yeah, so let's talk about why these auto zones are often flawed. They're using flawed assumptions, right? Like they might be using the 220 minus age formula or default zone percentages calculated at the population level. And like as an elite athlete, as I get further away, like those things become less applicable. And even if you're not elite, like maybe you're a menstruating athlete, maybe you're an aging athlete, like on average, athletes aren't average. So a lot of these averages are not usable. And they update either too slowly or sometimes even too frequently. Like my watch is constantly telling me like my heart rate.
Yeah,
like,
your threshold heart rate is...
It's changing.
Yeah.
No, that's not how anything works. After one hard run, your threshold zone might spike inaccurately. What my TrainingPeaks would have calculated as my threshold was actually going to be like 2 minutes slower than my real threshold.
Wow.
So
not great.
Don't use that number.
Nope.
And a lot of these things don't account for terrain, fatigue, cross-training. Like a few ski days or vert-heavy trail runs might not register properly and might throw the whole system off. So again, like your data is only as good as the assumptions and data sets that it's based on. And we don't always, like some of these apps might use black box algorithms. We don't always know what they're being filtered through or even what those base assumptions are.
How do you know if your watch generated zones are off? Here's an obvious one. Your watch is telling you you're in zone 5 when you're on an easy jog. You're always in zone 3, even when trying to go easy, or maybe you finish your workouts wrecked, even though they're supposed to be steady.
So let's talk about how to find and calibrate your zones with field tests. So if you don't have access to a lab like most normal people, let's talk about the old school ways to anchor your zones through field tests. So you could do a max effort workout. So you could pick one of the following based on your experience and training history. So you could do a 20-minute time trial, warm up with 15 to 20 minutes easy running, some strides just to get that turnover going, get the neuromuscular system firing, then run the hardest effort you can maintain for 20 minutes without blowing up and use average pace and heart rate. You could also do 6 by 3 minute intervals at RPE of 10 with 3-minute recovery, VO2 max style. Here you're aiming for that maximal sustainable output each rep, not a sprint. What I recommend is the Dirk Friel method, where I have athletes do a warm up and then a 30-minute effort at threshold, and then I take the average pace from the latter 20 minutes of that test, because athletes pretty much always start out a little too spicy. It's not perfect, right? Like you can still overshoot it. You can still undershoot it. If I'm not literally able to measure how much lactate is building up in your bloodstream, it's only ever going to be a pretty good approximation. Like I think it's a blunt object, but it's still a usable tool that I like to use in training. Mm-hmm. And then theoretically, in order to be accurate, like there's some places that say you should retest every 6 weeks. That's like not possible with training.
No.
So you do need to like update these things. But yeah, so you can take the average pace or heart rate from the 20-minute test and call that your threshold. And then, or just calibrate against your max effort and then sort of like trickle down. Again, that's a pretty blunt object. And that's why I prefer the 30 minutes and then take your average pace from the last 20 minutes.
Yeah. I like that when you have that max test, like for example, you can use like a 5K effort. Like if an athlete's done a 5K, you can use that to extrapolate what their 1 hour effort is or their functional threshold pace is. I don't always think that that's that perfect, because you can end up in these situations where for you example, and I think I'm probably similar to this, where it's like, well, my threshold effort is actually really close to my VO2 max. So shit, like that doesn't exactly follow like those clean lines of like 10% differences
like
in
my
heart max
physiology looks very different than like the cute little like zone thing you see on Strava.
Right. And so like I do think it's really helpful to know where that threshold lies. So like you can either target 10% up to 10% and up to threshold, or anything above threshold.
Yeah.
And that way you have kind of like, am I above it or am I within 10% of it? Because that's kind of where we want to be on our workouts, depending on the exact prescription. Like if it's VO2 max, you want to be above your threshold.
Yeah.
If it's a 1 hour effort, threshold paced effort, you want to be within 10% of that pace.
Yeah, and I tend to prefer the threshold effort as opposed to the max effort, because I think particularly with newer athletes, if they haven't done a lot of time at max intensity, their body literally may just not be able to do it correctly for as long as we would want it to be to get good data.
Yeah, so
Whereas
true.
if we do threshold, I think even novice athletes we can get you there, right?
Yeah.
Again, is it going to be perfect data? No. Does it need to be perfect? Not really. It's a gut check, but again, we're always defaulting to RPE. I'm not beating my athletes over the head with this stuff. But oftentimes when I do calibrate athletes threshold, oftentimes I will encourage one piece of data we can get from that. I feel like 90% of the time I use that data to tell athletes to slow down. And then 10% of that time I'm telling athletes to speed up on their intervals.
Yeah.
Just because sometimes athletes who haven't done a lot of VO2 max work aren't comfortable hanging out in that area, because it is
really hard,
very uncomfortable and hard.
I like to think about it as get to the feeling where you think you're going to throw up and don't go over the line.
Yep.
That's my barometer on those workouts. And it just isn't not that fun.
Not that fun.
After you're like, yeah, I did it. Awesome. It's like type 2 for sure. Okay. Common mistakes when setting zones. So one of the things that we see often, and also try to avoid in our coaching, is using old data. So don't set zones based on a race from last year or a test from when you were at peak fitness, unless for some reason it's applicable to where you're at right now. There's definitely some nuance there.
Sure.
But it really is important. Like, how old is that data? How old was that marathon effort that you're using to set those zones?
Yeah, but I don't need to see your time from the Big Sur marathon circa 1986. That's not going to be useful.
Right. Because what's your training looked like since then?
Yeah. And also environmental conditions, and that didn't happen in a vacuum either. It can be informative. I think a great gut check, don't train at a pace that is faster than your marathon pace. That's something that I'll see is I'll have athletes will, when we start working together, they'll be like, okay, I want to run this marathon time. I ran Chicago at this time and at this pace, and they're training at 30 seconds a mile faster than their marathon pace. Oh boy.
Oops. Zone 3.
Yeah.
Okay. Skipping the field test. Yeah, guys, man, if you're running a field test on yourself, self-coached, or you're doing this because you're my athlete or another athlete within microcosm, don't skip that field test. It's so important. It is just one data point, but over time,
if you want to use the data, it needs to start from a good place. And again, this is why we use RPEs, because you don't need to have great data to improve your body awareness, No,
but you do need to, coaches need a reference point.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. But again, this is why RPE is king and is more accurate. Hopefully in talking about the nuance of all of this, people will understand why we default to that primary as our sort of king data point.
Getting too fancy too fast. I love this one. Great language in the outline here, Zoe. I see this actually a lot more with my more elite athletes that I coach. Yeah.
I see this with men.
Yes, and they are men. And they are men.
Men love data.
It's just, kind of you're doing some steady state, but you're doing it at threshold pace.
Yep.
You're doing your easy run, but your easy run's in zone 3. Mm-hmm. You're doing your forever effort, recovery days, 4 out of 10 RPE. That's actually zone 2, bud. A lot of that, just letting it creep up. And then telling me that that's the pace. And because you've done the field test or we've done years of threshold work or whatever, I have a better idea of what your threshold is. And I get to see that. And I'm like, that's not correct. You got to slow down.
Yeah.
Usually it's slow down.
Yep. Yeah. 90% of the time. I think it's funny because people always be like, let's look at the data. And I'm like, do you actually want to? Because basically you're just handing me more ammo to tell you to slow down. I think people always think that I'm going to be like Rain Man or the Julia Roberts meme with floating numbers. Mostly I'm like, Yeah, data says you're running too hard.
You're a beautiful mind behind
I've
the
got like
TrainingPeaks.
exactly just like I've got like a cork board with like red thread and I'm just like,
Yeah.
okay, if they're VO2 max here, got the Big Sur Marathon 1986. It all connects. It's all together.
It's all connected.
So let's talk about when and how to recalibrate.
Yes.
So if you're consistently blowing up on workouts that you used to complete, or easy days aren't feeling as easy as they used to, or they feel too easy, or if you've had a break from training, maybe for injury, long-term illness, significant time off post-race, just general inconsistency, or if you've been doing a big block of volume or high intensity and you feel like your body has changed, like these things will continue to evolve. And we do, again, like theoretically, we would retest more frequently, but it's, for me, it's a risk benefit analysis of like, okay, how much do we really gain by having an athlete do this field test again? Is that going to give us data that's going to change how we train significantly? Well, usually no. Like for most people who are training consistently, no. Even though theirs might be like, I mean, could be changing, but you have to take time. Like you need to go into these tests rested. Like you have to do a little taper. Before I did like a significant down week before my test. All recovery runs.
Totally. And as you should. I do think it's important. I try to have my athletes, we've been using TrainingPeaks exclusively at at Microcosm for almost 2 years now. So I've had some athletes do 2 tests at this point.
Yeah.
So I'm looking like at a test every 6 months to at least 1 test a year. Sometimes I like to see like after a transition season where we're at, or at the end of a big season, did we make improvements? Where's our threshold effort now? I love it as a measurement of progress, and like hard evidence. It is only 1 data point, but I think it is nice when you have those things to talk about with athletes, because like, what the hell are we doing here if we're not trying to improve, and if we can't see that improvement in meaningful ways? Sometimes, you're not racing the same races you've raced before, so you don't have that point of comparison, or the marathon you did is hillier, so you're not going to be as fast, or you're at a different 100 than you were before, whatever it is. So this is a great thing for athletes to look at. Also, you want to just make sure that data is always up to date.
Yeah. So let's talk about if you should get a lab test and sort of the function and limitations of AI tools here, because this is a big area in training where AI is stepping in. So lab tests like VO2 max and lactate threshold tests can be useful if you have access to a reputable lab with solid equipment and knowledgeable staff. There are definitely places that like have the equipment, like sort of as like, look, we have it. But again, who's the lab tech?
Right.
And you're testing repeatedly to track trends, and you know how to apply the data to real world workouts. And again, like this is where I'm really pumped to have a coach who's like going to help me like at length figure out how to incorporate this and interpret this in my training.
Yeah.
I would also say that a solid 20-minute test will give you like 90% of the same insight, and you can do it in your own backyard. So
AI tools and smartwatches, just want to touch on this real quick. Great for suggestions and to like find trends in the training, but I would not let them dictate your training.
Yeah.
It tells me my VO2 max went from, XYZ to XYZ. You know what? It doesn't know shit. Like your hill score, great. Not cool. Like recovery score, throw that shit out the window.
Yeah.
Honestly. I would make sure that you do a field test, set your zones up, use an app like TrainingPeaks that helps you track and compare your efforts to that functional threshold. So you know if you're going easy, if you know you're in zone 3, if you know you're in zone 4, and so on and so forth. Anyone can do this. There's a lot of resources on their website that teach you how to use those metrics and set this stuff up. Not rocket science, just requires a little bit of your time and attention. But other than that, like, honestly, I just like would not recommend at all using AI tools or smartwatches.
Yeah. And again, like the stuff that Strava defaults to, not great. That Garmin defaults to, not great. Again, like a lot, like it's just hard to know how and why inaccurate they are, because it's black box algorithms. How flawed are the assumptions? What data sets are they using?
All right. Well, know your effort and trust your body, guys. It's pretty simple, but your best heart rate monitor is in between the ears. Your best all your awareness is up there. And that's the point of training over time. If you want to progress, you just have to get to know yourself at deep levels. I love for you, Zoe, how like going and doing this test helped you to reinforce that, like, you knew kind of like what these efforts felt like.
Yeah.
So you've done the work and this validated that.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yes. But also it made me realize, like, you know, again, like I had this prejudice of like, this is something that only pros should do. And I walked away feeling like, man, like this is a tool that could definitely be useful for all like levels of runner. Because like, think about how long I mean, I was training so stupidly for so long. Like,
Yeah.
I would try to, like the way I used to train was I would try to run at max effort for the full run, which is not how anything works. So like, you know, as much as I love to make fun of people on this podcast, like ultimately, like,
At least
I'm
you had
the problem, it's me.
You're the problem. At least you had a strong calibration point. You knew what your max effort was.
Yes.
No clue what easy running was, though.
No clue what that was. And I walked away being like, I think that taking a little more time and intention to set these zones could save runners a lot of injury and heartache earlier on in their careers. And I feel like a lot of the messaging around this sometimes makes it seem like it's something that's only for elites and pros. And like you have to be able to calculate your heart rate zones using a beautiful mind algorithm. And no, you don't. Like, again, like not everyone needs to do the lab test, but I think that learning how to calibrate your RPE and how to like think about your zones with this like comprehensive way of like RPE, heart rate, pace, like having a triangulation of data points, like is something that I think runners of all levels can do and should do. And if it's intimidating, I think that's where having a coach can be extremely helpful.
Yeah, shameless plug here. I have one athlete spot available.
Shameless plug for the idea of expertise in general.
I would love to work with you, so reach out. But seriously, you don't need the numbers to be perfect. So if you are self-trained and you're going to go and do one of these, like the Dirk Friel field test, great test. That's what I do with all my athletes, especially the ones I don't have significant training history to draw on. Those numbers don't have to be perfect, but that proxy and having that set point to compare everything to is a total game changer. If you're a coach listening to this and you have athletes who are using TrainingPeaks and you don't really know what their functional threshold pace is, do this, figure this out. It will level set your coaching so much. It'll take your coaching to the next level because you'll be able to actually provide real accountability to your athletes and whether they're doing their workouts at the right efforts. And you'll stop coaching based on vibes and you'll actually start coaching based on the hard numbers.
Yeah. If you want to use data, make sure it is usable.
All right, guys. Thank you. Thanks for listening. Microcosmcoaching@gmail.com. Send in your listener questions. We love hearing from you guys. And also Microcosm Coaching at Instagram. Yeah, we're on the Instagram. Yep. And microcosm-coaching.com. Check us out.
Yep, subscribe to the YouTube. Share with a friend.
Yeah, share with a friend. And yeah, if you made it this far, you must like this. You're probably just as crazy as us. Please rate and review. We would really appreciate that.
Later.